to the American people who loved it, and Carter was elected. Well, everyone remembers the rest, but what about after the White House? What was it like for Jimmy and Rosalind to go from a life of power and prestige to being home alone together as private citizens? Lynn Sherr found out.
It has been more than a decade since he first marched into the seat of power, the man they once called Jimmy Who becoming the leader of the free world. And it was 1978 when he pulled off his greatest success, personally negotiating peace between Israel and Egypt and ratifying the treaty with the signature of the United States president. Today, he's more likely to autograph the cast of a tourist who's still too young to vote. And while he hasn't quite become anonymous again, working at home these days has little of the grandeur of the Oval Office. Jimmy Carter has come home to Plains, Georgia, which is about as far as you can get from the pressure of Washington, D.C. The talk of this town does not tend to be of arms agreements, and nobody here is pressing to get a bill passed. But in the 6.5 years since vacating the White House, the Carters have reestablished their lives in Plains. And in their first recent television interview together, they acknowledged the pain of losing the election in 1980.
Well, there was a feeling of grief and frustration, a sense of being a victim of fate. And I have an ability, I think, to react fairly quickly and with some degree of self-control to crises of that kind. And we just made the best of it. You know, Rosalind was much more emotional about a loss and much more distraught than I was.
Well, I always thought it affected him as much, and he just didn't show it. I accused him of that. But I was heartbroken, and you wonder why this happened. You know, why the hostages happened on Jimmy's watch, why the oil prices went up. I think my reaction that first night, though, was, which I have always tried to do if anything bad happened, is to go to sleep and think it was a dream, and maybe I would wake up and it was not true.
What happened when you woke up and found it was true?
Every time I woke up, it was the same thing. It was true.
You people chose to come home to Plains, but I gather your daughter, Amy, who was then 13, didn't have the same idea. What did she say after you lost the election?
Well, she came in the bedroom the next day, and we were lying down and at this high canopied bed, and she put her arms up on the bed and she said, "I'm sad about this election." And I said, "Well, Amy, we all said we worked really hard to win." She said, "But I don't want to go home to Plains. You may be from the country, but I'm not. I've been raised in the city." And she was right.
The Carters faced another shock, too. They learned that the family peanut business, which they'd put into a blind trust as required by law, was not solvent, the result of droughts and changes of management. Suddenly, their financial future was in doubt, and the Carters were in debt.
Now, we were embarrassed to be in debt. We never had been in debt before in an uncontrollable way. We had borrowed money on occasion, but with a sure prospect of repaying it either ahead of time or on time. This was an unexpected sort of crisis. And we didn't know how we were going to pay it. You know, would we have to sell our farms? We didn't expect to sell our home. And how were we going to make a living after we left the White House? This was another thing.
So you were facing debt?
Yes.
Yes.
You were facing
an
defeat, empty life, is it fair?
A defeat that was embarrassing. We were facing a future of great uncertainty. You know, quite different from life in the White House, life in the governor's mansion. And we had made no plans for it.
Was it depressing?
Yes, it was. It was depressing, the prospects, and we realized, at least now we realize, that those kind of things are faced by many people who are not presidents, not first families, but, you know, you lose your job, you have debts to overcome, your last children leave home, you have an uncertain future. We finally realized that what we experienced, you know, at the presidential level, is what many other Americans experience every day.
And what were we going to do when we came back home? And that's the way we felt. That's the way I felt when I left the White House after all this exciting life. What are we going to do in Plains, Georgia?
It is a question you might ask even if you hadn't been First Lady. Plains has changed little since the Carters left town. True, the old campaign headquarters is abandoned now, And Brother Billy's gas station is a tourist attraction. But Cousin Hugh is still here, one of only a handful of Carters left in the immediate neighborhood. And on a walk down its lone main street, the town's best-known citizens pointed out that this is, after all, where they grew up.
In here, I used to sell hamburgers and ice cream on Saturdays. Hamburgers for a nickel apiece, or 3-dip ice cream cones for a nickel apiece.
Another thing about Plains is that we know everybody. Everybody knows us, and they care for us, whether we win or lose or what happens to us, and it's kind of coming home to a real close community.
Still, the first problem the first family faced was one they'd never even imagined: how to be home together all day.
It was not easy.
But I had never spent a full working day in the house, since I was an adult. And I never had. I always was busy doing something, and to be in the house all day was a shock to me.
Mrs. Carter, I assume there are millions of women out there who have told their husbands on retirement that they married them for better or for worse, but not for lunch. Did you go through some of that?
It was hard because when we've been home in the past for years and years and years, we did things together. We would go to the farm, we would go for walks. Well, when you're home all the time and Jimmy comes in and says, let's do something, and I don't want to right then, well, I'm busy right now. And I was probably doing the same thing to him. And we finally just had to sit down and talk about it, didn't we?
Mm-hmm. Rosalind Carter tried something new, posting a schedule of her own office hours on the door. It worked. But both she and her husband found an even broader outlet for their energies, raising money for and building the Carter Presidential Center in Atlanta. They created an organization that would focus on some of the unfinished business of his single term in Washington: human rights, world hunger, health problems, Mideast peace, and arms control. The former president is also serving as distinguished professor at Emory University, lecturing on subjects from public policy to modern history in a very personal manner.
Then Rosen said, why don't we get Bacon and Sadat to come up here where it's quiet and spend a couple of days and see if they can agree on something.
And they've written books, hers, his, and now theirs, Everything to Gain, Making the Most of the Rest of Your Life. It contains their advice from their own experience for people facing the emptiness of retirement. But they confess that collaborating on the book was not what you would call enjoyable.
That's the worst experience.
It was horrible.
Of our lives. We've been married 40 years, and that was the worst thing we ever tried to do together. And
Why?
And we will never write another book together.
Well, as Jimmy said, we have different work habits. He not only different habits, like he writes at one time and I write at another, but he just goes in and sits down and he can write a chapter in just a couple of days. It takes me 2 or 3 weeks. I study over it, I work
To write a
on
paragraph.
it. I go in, I lie down on the bed, and Jimmy says, I thought you were working on the book. Well, I am, I'm thinking. I don't have to be sitting at the word process. And then when I get mine written, after 2 or 3 weeks, I get one chapter written. I think he ought not to bother it.
Mine was always a rough draft. What she wrote, it's like she went up on Mount Sinai and received it from God, and it's absolutely sacred. Nobody can change it. When we started writing the book, we began to resurrect these things, like the election day and losing the warehouse and things of that kind. And I would go in and write what happened as best I could, and I would give it to Rosen to go over, and she'd say, this is not what happened. And I said, Rosen, it's what happened. I was there. She said, I was there too. It did not happen that way.
We got to where if we wanted to have any kind of relationship, we could not talk about the book.
Do you have a brief bit of advice for other couples who are thinking of writing books together?
Yes, don't
do it. We'll never do another one together.
No.
The book also contains tips on the steps to take after retirement, and they're following their own advice. They've been health conscious for years. She is 59, he's 62, but they act considerably younger.
I've just been really surprised that at my age, I thought I would be old, and I'm not. I don't feel like I am. What people have to realize is that the age is not what counts. It's your attitude toward life.
Does being out of the White House slow the aging process?
Probably does. Although we enjoyed being in the White House, we've enjoyed it being out too. And there's no reason why we shouldn't have just as challenging and exciting and perhaps even more fruitful, certainly a more flexible life at retirement age than we had when we were bogged down with a single career and major responsibilities for families and so forth. There's a great liberation, a great freedom that comes with retirement age.
And there's the freedom to look back on your career. When you ask about the past, Jimmy Carter still focuses on his last sleepless night in the White House in 1981, bringing up the one issue that probably sent him home to Plains. And on reflection, he says he has no regrets about the way he handled his Iran hostage crisis.
Mr. President, how many times in the last 6 years have you smiled quietly to yourself and said, I was right?
A lot of times, many
When?
times. Well, you know, I think the way we dealt with the hostage crisis has turned out to be the best that could have been done. We protected the interest and integrity and moral standards of our country, and every hostage came back safe and to freedom.
It took a very strong person. And Jimmy was pictured as weak when if people had known the pressure he was under to do something like bomb Tehran, something terrible, they would have known that it took a very strong person.
The two of you are obviously very happy with one another and have made peace with your life, but do you miss it?
I still do miss the campaigns and campaigning, and I even like the criticism. I liked all of it. I just enjoyed it.
Well, I wish I had had another 4 years in the White House. There's no doubt about that. There are some things that are very frustrating to me that I think could be done.
And I've tried to talk him into running for president again. He won't do it.
Are you serious?
I am serious. I would like for him to be.
Why won't you do it?
I don't.
He has,
First of all, I don't think I could get elected. Secondly, I just got other things now that are more important. And third, although I'm very interested in politics from an observer's point of view, from a senior statesman point of view, I haven't given up hope at all that we're going to have a very exciting new Democrat in the White House in January 1989.
Should we expect to see one of you back in politics in the future?
not me.
Not me. No. Maybe someday Amy would be in politics. We don't know that.
How would you feel about that?
Well,
I think it would be wonderful.
I think so too. But whether she has that ambition, I don't have any way to know. She'll make her own decision, and whenever she makes a decision, she'll have the full support of her parents.
The Carters may not be running for office anymore, but they still have plenty of influence. They are still treated like heads of state when they travel abroad, and they're welcomed like old friends when they visit at home. Both Jimmy and Rosalind Carter are still very much in the public eye and the camera's eye, and their photographers are often celebrities too. But while they're not exactly your average retired couple, they say much of what they learned applies to everyone.
I think that the main thing to do is stay busy, find things that interest you, don't get in a rut and do the same thing over and over again every day. And one of the most important things I think people can do is volunteer.
This is one way the Carters volunteer, and they showed us some of the skills they use building houses for the needy.
And I think one of the things that makes people old is a feeling of not being needed. And there's plenty to do.
Do you think, in view of what you people have done with your lives, one can go home again?
I think we've proven you can go home again. And you have to recognize that things change. We're different. Even Plains is different. I have to say that our life since that time proves that there is life after the White House.
He always had an honesty, Jimmy Carter, but it's taken him a long time to admit how painful it was to lose.
And it's still hard for him to do that, by the way.
Rosalind
You noticed.
admitted it from the beginning.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Lynn, Amy, did it make you feel as old as it did me, remembering that little child on the presidential trips, and now she's demonstrating against CIA and being tried and acquitted? How does he feel about all that?
They are so proud of her. And by the way, Rosalind Carter is equally amazed. She told me that she couldn't believe that Amy, who had been this shy, private little girl who hated all the publicity when her folks were in the governor's mansion and the White House, that she's the one that's now the activist. Yeah. Absolutely. But they very much support what she's doing.
What if she hadn't been acquitted and had gone to jail?
Well, they were delighted that she was acquitted, as you might guess. When they got the news, Rosalind got the news, ran in, broke up a meeting, and said to Jimmy Carter, Amy's free, Amy's free. The former president, by the way, said if she had to go to jail, he would have been prepared for it, but he would have done what he could to make it a short term.
Daddy and the ex-president.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Lynn.
Well, next.
In less than 48 hours, this magnificent horse, Ali Sheba, will try to become the first Triple Crown winner in 9 years. If she does...